peace belong to you. They are free gifts from the one who was and is to come. Can you hear me now? How about now? Can you hear me now? If ever a commercial message can define an age or a culture, it is this ubiquitous Verizon advertisement which touts the strength of its cellular network, strength to connect us to one another in the most places and at the fastest possible speed. Now maybe it's just me, but it seems the more connected we are, the harder it is to listen and to understand one another, as the need for immediacy overwhelms any sense of context. After all, if something didn't happen in the past 24 hours, who cares? Well, the gospel calls us to live in the here and now, but we do so sometimes at the peril of our spiritual health if we fail to heed all of those voices from the Bible that have preceded us, offering guidance for today, filtered by past lessons of history. When we say, as we often do in the United Church of Christ, that God is still speaking, it means that the ancient voices of the Bible call each generation to new ways of hearing divine wisdom. But sadly, it's often hard for those voices to break through all the modern clutter around us. Can you hear me now? Is a real and present question in our search for God, not only in our calling out for meaning, but in our God responding, to paraphrase the prophet Isaiah, I'm right here. Open your eyes and look around you. This morning, I want to invite you to new ways of listening to wise old Isaiah, whose book is frequently described as the fifth gospel, because it points so clearly to the message of Jesus. And we will begin by allowing Isaiah 40 to reinterpret itself through three modern stories and experiences. Now, from the screen, you probably recognize the scene from the 1981 award-winning film, Chariots of Fire. It's a true story of English runners in the 1924 Paris Olympics. The lector with the Scottish brogue is one of the world's elite runners, but he refuses to participate in a qualifying race because it falls on a Sunday. And true to his Presbyterian heritage, he will not break the Sabbath, even though he wants nothing more than to compete in an event that everyone knows he can win. So on the Sunday of the qualifying race, Eric Liddell stands in the pulpit of the Church of Scotland in Paris, reading from Isaiah 40, part of which is also our lectionary text for today. It is a majestic passage that speaks poetically of the grandeur of God, the grandeur of a God who brings divine power to astonishing intimacy by calling each one of us by name to God's own unique purpose. The text is about clinging to hope and faith amid the turbulence of life. In the film, running is an elaborate metaphor for the challenges we face, about getting up when you fall, about staying the course, much as Isaiah was urging the abandoned Israelites to hold on to the faith of their fathers, even in the midst of exile. The book of Isaiah, at 67 chapters, is the largest book in the Bible. It's penned by three different writers spanning over 3 centuries, roughly from the 8th through about the 6th century before Christ, and covering the period when the prophet warns darkly of impending invasion by foreign armies, the period when the actual exile seems to have lasted an eternity, and the period when the return from exile at last seemed to offer new hope. Isaiah 40 is from that period when the Israelites were scattered against their will, and the writer is attempting to offer hope that the God who is still God hasn't forgotten his chosen people. Have you not known? Have you not heard? So proclaims the voice of God through the prophet Isaiah. It wasn't always so for me, but Isaiah, over the years, has become one of those passages I turn to when I need to move my understanding of hope from naive dreaming to resolute expectation. When I need to be reminded, as I often do, to choose joy over doubt and despair. When pain or illness or loss needs inevitably to give way to the inevitable promise of God, the God who is as close as the next breath or as near as the incarnate God in the form of Jesus, healing a sick woman from a devastating fever and healing countless others who were put before him. As the hymn that we will soon sing proclaims, in echoes of the text, it is in such moments of turning, that we are lifted up on eagle's wings. The reason that Isaiah counsels so strongly to hold on to hope, even in the worst of times, is that the people of Israel, God's chosen, have forgotten who they are. Not unlike those in some churches who don't remember what they believe or why they believe it, and consequently feel lost and somewhat alone. Perhaps some of you have felt that way. Maybe even now. We love God when times are good, but the moment we confront trouble, we collapse with anxiety and stress. We all know of folks. I spoke to one just this week, who, when illness or loss or some other calamity strikes, retreat behind closed doors, draw the shades, as if what is happening is theirs alone to wrestle with, in a closet of fear and doubt, and most often some form of disbelief. When pain hits, it's hard not to think of anything else. God reminded me of that this past week. I have an abscess tooth that's all drugged up waiting for a visit to Roto-Rooter. And frankly, it's all I can think about. So when it's hard not to think of anything else or see anything else, and it's in those times that we tend to forget about God, the one who is still present even though we choose not to see or to hear. Most of us understand that we and our children are going to get knocked around a bit, sometimes so unfairly that it can take our breath away. But sadly, many miss the reality that hope is found in how we get back up when we fall. Allow me, if you will, to illustrate our still speaking God with another story. This time it's about our little JJ, who, as many of you know, is dying of a cancerous tumor in his shoulder. It's been 2 years now since we first received the diagnosis, and yet he's still barking along. For a while, though, our world sort of stopped as we concentrated on how to care for him in his dying. But it wasn't until the crisp clarity of a story from that wonderful writer, Annie Lamott, and the dying of her dog, Sam, that I was reminded of the blessings that have been in our midst these past 2 years. Instead of focusing on impending loss, our hearts shifted to embracing Jay for all he has meant to us and still means to us. As Annie's vet explained what was ahead for Sam, he carefully pointed out that even when we are ill and in pain, when everything seems to hurt, be we animal or human, 95% of the rest of our body is still healthy and well and functioning. It's that small 5% that makes us look and feel miserable. Or to use a theological term, just plain crappy. I've been at a lot of dying bedsides, far more than I ever expected. And I've yet to meet someone at the end of life who didn't focus on the joy of their existence and the time that was given to them. Not one. And as you know, I've done more than 20 funerals in these last 2 years. The reality of our hope in God is that joy and suffering have always been interconnected. For example, when we look at the euphoria of the resurrection, as we will soon, too often forgetting that Friday, that particular Friday of despair and the darkness of the tomb on Saturday. Jesus had to go through that. We have to go through that in order to reach the resurrection dawn. The people of Israel, in the diaspora of their despair, felt alone and abandoned by God. And they struggled to hear the voice of Isaiah, who reminded them in the words that sound like that Verizon commercial, "Can you hear me now?" The prophet thunders, "Have you not known? Have you not heard?" Those who wait upon the Lord will renew their strength. One can almost picture this craggy-faced prophet waving his hands at the stars in the night sky, saying as the voice of God, "Look, I know how many there are. I've counted them, just like I've counted all of humanity, as numerous as grasshoppers. And I won't miss a one. So trust me." The story of the Bible, if it is consistent at all in anything, is consistent in one thing. God always, always bends difficulty and pain and suffering back toward the joy of redemption and reconciliation, but all in God's good time. The assurance that we are cared for in our insignificance by the vastness of a Creator who is beyond our imagination brings me to the last story I want to share. It's borrowed from Cameron Trimble, the director of the Center for Progressive Renewal in Atlanta. It's an organization that's closely connected with this church, you may not know, and with the UCC in general. The story says that in our rush to figure things out for ourselves, as if God is too distant and too irrelevant to matter, we are missing gifts in one another right before our eyes. So as the story goes, the legend goes, tells of a man who carried water every day to his village using 2 large pitchers tied on either end of a stick stretched across his back. One of the pitchers was older than the other and was full of lots of small cracks and nips and chips. Every time the man came back along the path to his house, half the water was lost. For 2 years, the man made this same back and forth journey. The younger pitcher was always proud of the way it did its work and was sure it was up to the task at hand. The other pitcher was mortally ashamed that it could carry only half of its task, even though it knew that the cracks were from long years of work. So ashamed was the older pitcher that one day when the man was preparing to fill it up again, it decided to speak to him. "I wish to apologize, sir, because due to my age, you only managed to take home half the water you fill me with, and thus quench only half the thirst awaiting you in your house." The man just smiled and said, "When we go back, be sure to take a careful look at the path. Pitcher did as asked and noticed many flowers and plants growing along one side of the path. Did you see how much more beautiful nature is on your side of the road? I knew you had cracks, but I decided to take advantage of them. I sowed vegetables and flowers there, and you always watered them. I picked dozens of roses to decorate my house, and my children have lettuce and cabbages and onions to eat. If you were not the way you are, I could never have done this. We all, at some point, grow old and acquire other qualities, and these can always be turned to good advantage. The story that Cameron tells, like the text of Isaiah 40, is a reminder that faith is not about believing in doctrines, about finding security and comfort in institutions or belonging to groups. Faith is an active, let me say that word again, active and positive accepting of what is, moment by moment, event by event, tragedy by tragedy, grace by grace. Faith allowed Isaiah to see not only God in all things, but to believe that God could and would use all things for God's purposes in history. In the self-absorption of our own pain, we too easily forget who God is and how God is still guiding us toward a better purpose, even when feelings of loss and aloneness just seem to swamp us like a tsunami. Do I ask you, as I look out over a lot of seasoned faces filled with many life experiences, what can the cracks in your well-lived, worked-out lives teach you and the rest of us today? What have we nurtured and sowed as a church and a faith community? What is blooming because of our presence and our time here? And what remains for us to point to hope for those who come after us? What else is out there? We're not going to see if we don't look. So can you hear me now? Can we hear one another better? Can we hear the patient voice of the one who says, I'm right here, where I've always been. Look, and you shall find me. I promise I won't lose you. Can you hear me now? Amen.